and just do it over the phone. How's that sound?
Yeah, because I can't get it up on the computer, unfortunately. I don't know what's going on.
That's all right. We got John. We're happy to have you, Eddie. Eddie, first of all, thank you so very, very much. Right after the holidays for coming on with us. It is definitely an honor to have you on our show tonight.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being on.
You know, Eddie, we think about times, and I grew up in Long Island. I was born in '66, and ever since I've been a Met fan, it's been Eddie Kranepool, Eddie Kranepool, Eddie Kranepool. You know, ever since the time I was born. Let me ask you this. When you look back, Eddie, did you ever think 1962, you're 17 years old, and in September, you're called up to the expansion New York Mets? What was that like at the age of 17?
Well, the first couple of times I went out on the field, I was nursed into it. Casey brought me in late for defense. I got out there, my legs were shaking, a little nervous. And then he told me if I was going to start a ball game on a Saturday, he gave me about 3 days notice, I guess, to get all my nerves settled down. And finally I did. I started the ball game against the Chicago Cubs at 17 years of age. And it was exciting. It was fun to play for Casey. He was a great manager, and he was a great person to be around because he loved the young players and wanted to see them develop. And he brought myself along, and then as the years went on, we kept adding younger players to the mix, and of course it made it a lot of fun for myself after the first 2 years. Because in the beginning I had guys my roommate was Frank Thomas, who was 35 years of age, and myself being 17, you don't have a whole lot in common with them. And most of the guys in our ball club were of the older generation, and they were twice my age, so it was a long, tough season, and it was a long season because on the road I had nobody to hang out with. My first friend was Brian Spoder, and then Tug McGraw, and then of course Jerry Cruzman, and the rest of the crew all came along, and we wound up developing into a pretty good ball club.
Now, let me ask you, as a youngster, you're 17 years old, you know the team is starting to get young players, but how frustrating, Eddie, was it to go through those early years with an expansion ball club not winning many games?
Well, as it turns out, it was probably the toughest thing to do for the simple reason that when you first sign a contract, you've been a pretty good player throughout your Sandlot career and high school career, and you expect to win and you expect to be on a positive situation. But of course, with the Mets, there was never anything good enough because one player can't bring a ball club into a tenant situation, so it made it very difficult. No matter what you did, there was mostly negative publicity surrounding the ball games because when you lose 100 games in 7 years in a row, there's not a lot of good things to write about. So they wrote all the negative information out there and made it difficult to play because, they never wrote if you got 2 or 3 hits, it wasn't good enough because somebody lost the ball game and there was a reason to write about it. So it was very tough until 1968. We made a managerial change. Gil Hodges came aboard. We made a great trade there, trading some players for Gil. And of course, he turned the whole situation around in a little over a year. He came over in '68. He was the manager. In '69, he said, guys, last year we had a tough year, but if we win some of those close games that we were out there in, and you learn how to play the game correctly, we're going to be competitive. And by mid-season, we were competitive. We were catching up with the league and all developing the side at the same time. And of course, we had a great pitching staff, with the nucleus of Kuzma and Seaver as 1-2. But we had other guys that was waiting in the wings. We had a guy like Gary Gentry. He had a great arm. We had a kid named Owen Ryan that was coming out of the bullpen because he wasn't going to be starting every 4th day, replace Seaver. And he didn't develop in New York, but he became a superstar. And so we had great arms, and it became fun to play. It was the first time, since I signed, that baseball was fun again.
Ed, before we get into the 1969 year, I meant to ask you at the beginning of the show while I was getting you on. I mean, how are you feeling? I know you had the kidney transplant about a year ago. I mean, How is everything going? I mean, are you feeling healthy again?
I'm feeling great. It's been 18 months, knock on wood. Everything is going correctly, and I'm taking care of myself from the standpoint that I've been inside for the last 9 months. This COVID situation has got everybody completely baffled, and I'm getting tired of being in. But you've got to watch yourself. I'm vulnerable because I take a lot of medication for anti-rejection, and I got to be careful because my immune system is not the best. But I feel good, and I'm ready to get out and go to the ballpark. I hope there's a season this year. I know with the new ownership the Mets have, it should be exciting. I would imagine they're going to go after a couple of free agents because they only need a few guys. They've got a nucleus of young kids that look like they've been developing, and they're going to be good. So if the Mets add one or two key players, I think they can be very competitive this year.
Eddie, how important is it to a former player like yourself who played in the early years to have the team when they win after that? Meaning the 86 Mets, the 2015 Mets who lost to the Royals. But how important is it how do you feel as a former player when even the guys that have played after you are getting to the World Series?
Well, it's fun to watch. Being a New Yorker my whole life, I've been a New York fan. I grew up as a Yankee fan, being brought up in the Bronx. But then when I signed with the Mets, my allegiance turns to the National League, and I only played in the National League, so you become a fan. And later on, when I retire, I like to watch the game of baseball. I'm not the greatest fan because I don't cheer and jump around like most people. I enjoy watching the game. I enjoy the good plays on both ball clubs, and I react to that. But it's fun watching the ball club that you played for and you have allegiance to it, and I still do public relations for them, do well. It makes it more exciting in New York, and it's a great town to be in. It's a great baseball town. They never forget the winning situations. The New York fans are tremendous as far as baseball is concerned. They know the game. So when you walk around New York and it's a positive attitude and a winning ball club, they reflect on the times you were there and the good times. And of course, they bring up today's players and they ask you to critique them and see what you have to say. And I don't like to say anything negative about any of the current players. But, you watch them and you have fun. And I've got close to some of the guys because I do have access to the ballpark and I have access to the clubhouse under the Wilpon family took over after I retired. I was allowed to go around the stadium, so it's been a fun existence.
Well, let's go back to 1969. Let me ask you this, Eddie. When you were playing on that team, when was it that you actually felt that during that year that, darn it, we may be good enough to win this thing?
Well, in spring training, we didn't have any ideas of winning the World Series. We wanted to get to 500. That was our goal, and we got to 500 in June. And we got there by beating the California teams. We beat the Dodgers, the Giants, and San Diego 9 or 10 games in a row, and we came back to face Chicago Cubs in New York, who was in first place at the time. But we finally got a little bit above 500, and we faced them head to head, and we swept them 4 games. So their 10-game lead or 12-game lead that they had at the time dwindled down by 4 games, and we started to play great baseball in the second half of the season. We grew a tremendous ball club because we all came together. We melded as a team, and it was great. And the leadership skill, we certainly played the game the way you're supposed to. We didn't make no mistakes. We were a good defensive ball club. And then, of course, with his disciplinarian style, we all had to play the game the way it was supposed to be played. And we didn't beat ourselves. We beat the other clubs, and we beat every ball club that we had to win against, including the Cubs. Every time we played the Cubs, we not only beat them, we swept them series. So you pick up a lot of ball games. And finally, in September, we went head-to-head against them, and we beat them. And we were behind
Tom Seaver and Jerry Koosman that year and what they meant to that pitching staff. Because I always thought growing up that the best left-handed pitcher that I've ever seen pitch in baseball, and I got to see it at Shea Stadium, of course, was Jerry Koosman.
Well, Jerry was a tremendous competitor, and he was the guy who really won out there in a tough ball game because, you know, he had nerves of steel, and when he went out on the mound, he dominated the ball clubs, and of course, he took charge. He was the one that really put Chicago in its place. They were a ball club that was cocky. They had some great players, a number of Hall of Famers on the ball club, but they had a couple of guys that would like to joke around at the other team's expense. And, you know, they used to like to knock players down, you know, which they don't do anymore in baseball. But they pitch you tight and knock you off the plate. They did it a couple of times with our players. And they did it at the beginning of the series against Chicago in New York. And Koosman happened to be pitching, and the first hitter in the next inning was Ron Santo, and he threw a fastball that if Ronnie doesn't stick his wrist up, his arm up, it would have hit him right between the eyes. And that stopped all the knockdown pitches, and now the Chicago was throwing the ball out over the plate, and we started tattooing him. So he was the enforcer on our ball club. He was the one guy. Seaver was a great pitcher. He had great ability. You know, when you ask Tom to knock somebody down, most pitchers know when you want somebody to get knocked down. He would throw over their head, but it'd be about 2 feet over their head, where Jerry Koosman might throw it right between his shoulder blades.
Right. I want to play this little clip here for a minute, Eddie. I don't know if you're going to be able.
Kranepool with a World Series home run that puts the Mets out in front 5-0.
Did you hear that?
No, I couldn't.
Okay.
Just tell me. Maybe I can.
Yeah, I know you'll be able to comment on it. That was game 3 of the World Series. You hit a home run over the right field wall. How special of a moment was that for you in 1969? You get to the World Series, you're on the biggest stage in New York City, and you hit a home run in game 3.
Well, that was a great feeling, and we were all pumped up for it for the simple reason that the left-handed hitters on the ball club won the playoffs against Atlanta, who our pitching staff kind of faltered a little bit, but we scored a lot of runs, 9-10 games, but 9 or 10 runs a game, and we were expecting to play in New York with Gil platooning all season. Of course, he continued to platoon. He started the right-handers the first 2 games, and we split. We were lucky to win the second game, and who was on the mound was Jerry Koosman, who was the first game with Tom Seaver. He comes back and pitches a great ball game, and we win. We come back to New York, and we face the ace of the Baltimore staff, Jim Palmer, you know, being right-handed, so all the left-handers who have been sitting on the bench for a couple of days now get a chance to play, and it was so hot in the playoffs. Well, we jumped on Jim Palmer and knocked him out. We scored 6 runs that game, and hitting a home run, you know, that you just fly around the bases. You're on cloud 9. This is the goal of every player that gets to the major leagues, you know, to get into the World Series, the opportunity to play in front of the largest crowd baseball's ever going to have. And we were out there having a good time. We were all about the same age. We were all about 25 years of age. We all grew up together. We were a close team. There was no I in team. Nobody felt any pressure. Everyone did their job. And when we played, we all platooned. Nobody liked it, but we all did our job because we respected Gil and the way he managed. And we performed, and we got knocked out. After scoring 6 runs, you would think that the manager might say, well, the next game we'll start the same lineup. We did a pretty good job. We won 6-0. He sat us back down on the bench, and he brought the right-handers back, and they all produced. And they did a great job, and we won the World World Series handedly against Baltimore. After losing the first game, we beat them 4 straight. They didn't know what hit them. Of course, they didn't expect our pitching staff came around in the World Series.
Right.
When you have guys like Nolan Ryan coming in relief, you know, the career this gentleman's had, and it's been unbelievable. And we didn't see him develop in New York, but certainly, you know, we read an awful lot about him. He did his best work when he was out of New York.
Eddie, I have one of a big fan of yours from Long Island named Lou on the comment section, and it's kind of interesting because he had a similar question I was just about to ask you, and I'm going to go ahead and ask you for Lou. It's a 2-part question. He wants to know, first, if you have any good stories to tell about your experiences with Gil Hodges is part 1, and then number 2, we talked about 1969, wants to know what your perspective of the 1973 NL pennant winning Mets was.
Well, the 73, let's take that question. The 73 team really reacted the same way the 69 ball club came. We had a ball club that was a good ball club, but we had a lot of injuries early in the season. And as the season progressed, we were all getting frustrated that we couldn't put a whole ball club on the field. We had so many guys on the Indians reserve list. But late in the year, the end of July, we started getting healthy and all the guys came back. And we all performed and played. Again, we were being platooned, this time by Yogi. But the only difference is when we got to the World Series, you know, we should have beat the Oakland A's. That's the biggest disappointment of my life because, you know, nobody forgets to finish the second. They always want to know who wins the World Series. When you're up 3 games to 2 in the 6th game, and you have a guy like Seaver and the rest of the staff, and George Stone, who was probably our most valuable pitcher coming down the stretch, he was 12-3. He should have pitched the 6th game, and Yogi decides to go with Seaver short-rested. Big mistake. The players knew it. Seaver knew it. The only one that didn't know it was Yogi. And we pitched Seaver. We lose the 6th game. George Stone to this day hasn't pitched, and the Mets don't recover, and we lose the 7th game. Seaver gets knocked out. We could have left on Saturday night to come home. We knew we didn't have a good shot. Seaver was tired at the end of the year. Yogi, he just didn't get it. And you know what? It cost him because 2 years later, I think he got fired. The players never recovered from losing the World Series in 73. So it was a big disappointment. We should have won that one. Now, as far as myself playing for Gil was a very strict disciplinarian. And when he came over, he changed the whole atmosphere of the ballpark. But when you're around there so long, and I was there 7 years, you develop bad habits, and it's tough to change, and it's tough to take all that criticism. But he either played his way or he hit the highway, and I had my ups and downs with him. So did my roommate, Ron Sabota. Sometimes, you know, we verbalized too much and we, you know, talked about it or responded to Gil in a negative way, and he'd sit you down or send you out. He'd do whatever he had to. But he had one set of rules for 25 players. He was a great manager. He never made a mental mistake. And, you know, you're playing under him. You had to play good fundamental baseball, and we became a good team. We'd have won more pennants in New York with Gil Hodges, and I definitely know we would have won the 73 World Series. We wouldn't have made that mistake. A mistake in a short series can cost you the series. One mistake in a whole season, that doesn't matter because the best ball club's going to win 162 games. A short series, I want the best manager. If there's everything things about moves, he's going to make it the 8th inning, not vice versa, like, you know, I feel Yogi was doing.
Now, when you first started with the Mets, did you ever think 17 years later that would be the only team that you ever played for?
Well, you don't think of that, especially when you're losing. The first couple of years, it gets tough. After a while, you never expect to win. By the All-Star break, you're eliminated, so it becomes very frustrating. So it's not fun. You know, it's fun in the beginning when you get an opportunity to get to the major leagues. But, you know, winning is the only thing that's important from a baseball player standpoint. So you want to be out there winning, and every year the same thing's happening. the second half of the long season is the longest when you're eliminated and you have nothing to play for. So it got very old, and I thought before 69 I was going to get traded, and sometimes you look forward to it. And right before 69, I thought it was a good chance I was going to get traded, but it never came about. I'm glad that it didn't. I stayed in New York. I played another 10 years after 69, and finally I called it quits for the simple reason I had a lot of ups and downs. We were losing in the beginning, then we won, and then we lost a couple of years, won again in 73. And then right after 73, we had another season where we were decent, but then we really went to the bottom, and everything went wrong. We started signing young players, long-term contracts. Baseball changed, and the ownership, Mrs. Payson, passed away. She let her daughter run the ball club, and unfortunately for them, they were signing young players to 5-year contracts who I didn't think deserved it. When you're on a last-place team, you don't give longevity contracts, 5-year contracts, because the complacency comes in. There's only a few guys who can give a long-term contract. Maybe a guy like Pete Rose, who played hard regardless of whatever, because that was his makeup. But most players don't perform under those long-term guaranteed contracts. That's too much in the player's favor, and so many things can go wrong. And I don't think any of the players really produced up to their, possibility of being a better player. I think we all could have been better players if you had some incentives in there.
A couple more questions before I let you go. And 1990, you're inducted into the New York Mets Hall of Fame. How much of an honor was it for you to be recognized by that organization?
Well, I think at the time when I got inducted, I had every offensive record on the ball club, and to this day, which is quite a few years later, I still have the most games played in the Met organization. I have everything at Shea Stadium. I started at Shea in '64, and then they folded the stadium. But when the stadium closed, I had every record at Shea Stadium: the most hits, the most doubles, most games, etc. And it was a great honor for myself. And then went over to City Field, and eventually I did David Wright on City Field as my record most hits. I said I had a 20-year slump. I didn't do anything for 20 years. So I held a lot of records for a lot of years. It's always good to go back there. The players know who you are. The fans certainly respect what you did for them. New York, like I said, is a great town. Play it. When you play in New York, you do well. They shrine you in their own minds. It's great to talk to them.
And mentioning that, that's got to be a great feeling to know that after all these years, we're in 2021, and that when you look back on your career, you are still considered one of the fans' favorite of all time.
Well, you were there so long, and people grew up with you. That's the thing. So the parents talk about you, the grandparents talk about you, the young kids today, they might not recognize you in the beginning, but after hearing their parents and grandparents talk about you, they look up the records and they follow you, and it's fun to see their faces when they look at you. Obviously you're a lot older now, your hair has turned a little gray. Well, actually, I should say a lot gray. But they look. You were a player. I said, yeah, my whole life. But it's always fun to talk to the people, and I still do a lot of things public relations wise. This has been a slow year for everybody, but I guess being that in the Zoom business, everybody's able to do some things, and I've done some Zoom appearances, at different homes. The Met Alumni Association hooks us up with a lot of the senior citizen facilities and the older people, and we get on the phone and we kid with them and we have a good time. And most of them are real old Met fans. They're great to talk to. They're great to be with, and I enjoy entertaining them for a few minutes.
Now, Eddie, my last question. I was going to ask you this earlier. I want to wait till the end. We talked about Shea Stadium. We talked about Citi Field a little bit. A lot of people don't realize that when the Mets first existed, they played at neither of those stadiums. It was the Polo Grounds, if I remember correctly. What was it like? I mean, there's a nostalgic place, the Polo Grounds. What was that like the first couple of years?
Well, it was a difficult ballpark for me because the right center and left center was 420 feet, I think. Dead center was 480, and so the pitcher would work your way and try to pull the ball. You hit it into the gaps, maybe long outs. I mean, there were only 3 balls or 4 balls hit into the bleachers in the Polo Grounds. I happened to be in the outfield back in those days.
Right, I was just going to say that.
Yeah. Henry Aaron hit one that I chased down, and Lou Brock hit one also that I chased down, and they went into the bleachers 480 feet away. So it was a milestone. I think the only other gentleman that hit a ball in the bleachers was Joe Adcock. So there was 3 balls, I believe, hit in the Polo Ground bleachers, and I saw 2 of them.
Wow. Well, listen, Eddie, first of all, I'm very glad to hear you're doing very well, especially health-wise. I do want to, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for joining us on Frankly Speaking Sports tonight.
Okay, I'd love to come back when I can get this computer working, and look forward to becoming your fans. Thank you very much.
All right, you be safe, sir, and Happy New Year.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. That was the great Eddie Kranepool.